In the wake of Nelson Blount's tragic death, fears surfaced almost immediately over the future of his railroad creations. The Steamtown Foundation indicated that every effort would be taken to see that Steamtown, USA and passenger excursions would remain in the area. Fred Richardson was to oversee Nelson's estate and personally assured that the season's excursion schedule would be maintained. Settling Nelson's estate, with his many business ventures and railroad creations, was not a simple matter. The survival of the freight-hauling Green Mountain Railroad, perhaps the most important entity of all, was of the utmost importance. Nelson had held the majority of the corporation's stock. A meeting was held on September 9, 1967, wherein Ruth Blount was elected to succeed her recently late husband as a stockholder. She also briefly became its president and CEO from September 1st until December 31st. On December 31st, 1967, the transfer was made, or the sale was made, from the Blount estate to the Green Mountain with the understanding that at the time, Robert W. Adams would have the controlling interest. It was the feeling of both Fred Richardson and the Blount family that it might work better if there was one person controlling the Green Mountain Railroad. Adams had been with Nelson since his start in the area and had been his superintendent almost from the very early stages. Adams assumed the title of president of the Green Mountain Railroad Corporation from January 1st, 1968, and served in that capacity until May 15th, 1978. Adams took his pension on January 1st, 1988, after railroading for nearly 46 years, starting with the Rutland Railroad. He passed away on December 2nd, 2010, at the age of 85. In the sale, Adams was allowed to sell 49% of the Blount shares to Green Mountain Railroad employees and others, which he did, making the Green Mountain an independent entity and an employee-owned corporation. The Green Mountain also purchased the engine house property in North Walpole from the Monadnock Steamtown in Northern. They set to work dedicated to their original intention, the difficult task of mountain freight railroading in the harsh New England climate. When offered the opportunity by Fred Richardson to lease or purchase the Steamtown collection, Adams and the Green Mountain refused. They simply had enough on their plate with freight and their existing steam excursions. Just a week prior to his death, Blount had visited Fred Richardson at his lake house on the northern end of Lake Winnisquam in Meredith, New Hampshire, the town in which Richardson was born. According to Richardson, the two rented a rowboat and had a conversation out on the water. Nelson had talked about stepping down as director of Steamtown. It had begun to get to him, and he had put a lot of money and time in where there were a lot of problems. Nelson felt that Edgar Meade would be more successful in fundraising and was one of the only fully involved board members that lived locally. Following Blount's death, the Steamtown Foundation named Edgar Meade director of the foundation in October 1967. Meade's first action was to ensure that the future of Steamtown would stay at Riverside. In his lifetime, Blount had funded much of Steamtown development himself, in addition to transferring his private collections to the effort. But Nelson certainly did not expect to perish so soon in the way that he had, and as reported by Fred Richardson, there was no residual money for Steamtown in his will. Meade later recalled the financial struggles that emerged in the wake of the tragedy.
All roads led to Nelson Blount on this project. He had the momentum, resources, and he had the target of what he wanted to do with this, so it could not possibly happen at a worse time. But we picked it up as best we could. At the first meeting when I became chairman, we felt that A, since there was no money, we had to spend most of our time fundraising, and B, the collection simply could not be left outdoors to rot in the severe winters of Vermont. So, what money we were able to raise we put into sheds, and during my tenure at Steamtown, we were able to cover about half the collection. Edgar T. Meade.
The trustees intended to carry out Nelson's vision, which had only partially begun to move forward when he had passed. The property, which had previously been purchased by the Green Mountain Railroad, was given to the Steamtown Foundation. The Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern Amusement Corporation ceased operations on December 31st, 1967. Just prior to Nelson's death, passenger operations had become the responsibility of the Green Mountain Railroad instead, and would remain so until August 1970. The Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern, no longer operating, now simply owned real estate and rolling stock. Ruth Blount, who had also served as an incorporator of the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern, inherited control of the corporation, its assets, and its real estate. Along with Fred Richardson, she had every intention of transferring the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern assets over to the Steamtown Foundation. With the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern in limbo, its physical traces began to fade. In 1966, the water tower at Riverside had worn the yellow Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern logo, but by 1968, it had been replaced with one simply reading Steamtown, USA, with the yellow rim painted gray. As the Green Mountain was now operating the excursion trains, there was no reason to promote the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern, a separate entity that was now redundant. The three organizations which Blount had led the way in creating, the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern, the Green Mountain Railroad, and Steamtown, USA, were all heading down different paths. For the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern, the path would be a dead end. The process of dissolving the defunct organization began in the spring of 1971. The Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern's time was over. It had existed for just over a decade. 10 years of hopes and dreams, successes, failures, and new beginnings. A colorful tapestry of memories. That sunny summer of 1961, the wave of excitement for Keene, and the dredges of disappointment from its failure, the bright new prospects in Vermont. All are now either memories or curiosities. With his intentions for Steamtown, USA unrealized during his lifetime and never really at all in the manner that he had dreamt of, the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern was perhaps Nelson's proudest creation. It was through the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern that he could finally live out his dream of operating standard gauge steam locomotives. In a way, when F. Nelson Blount left the world, the Monadnock, Steamtown, and Northern left with him, and became another closed, yet beloved, chapter in the long history of Steamtown. And so, the Steamtown Foundation forged ahead into the 1970s. But the Vermont Environmental Protection Agency sought to enact clean air regulations, which would force the costly conversion of the steam locomotives to burn propane. It was unlikely that the for-profit Green Mountain Railroad would be able to advocate for an exemption, but the non-profit Steamtown Foundation had a chance, and prevailed with a permanent variance. On August 28, 1971, Nelson Blount's last remaining railroad creations, the Green Mountain Railroad and the Steamtown Foundation, went their separate ways officially. Steam operations instead went to the Steamtown Foundation. 260 No. 89 was sold to the Strasburg Railroad of Pennsylvania in 1972, and 462 Pacifics 1246 and 1293 were sold to Steamtown. The Green Mountain was officially out of the steam passenger business. There was to be some tension between the two groups in the days ahead, specifically involving shared properties and maintenance to the tracks upon which they both used. All in all, the two ended up coexisting well. Over the next 12 years, Steamtown, USA in Vermont remained a popular yet troubled attraction. Its steam excursions and famous railfans weekends were well frequented, and photography abounds. Yet the high visitor levels anticipated by Blount and the town of Rockingham were never realized. In Steamtown, USA's best year, 1973, there were 65,000 paid admissions, far fewer than other New England tourist railroads with smaller collections and better locations. Nelson Blount's Steamtown, USA was never realized. The Grand Roundhouse, museum buildings, and replica village never saw construction. Only Phase 1, with its landscaping, construction of storage tracks, and installation of a turntable and storage buildings, saw completion. Without Nelson's support and dedication at funds both financial and personal, his dreams could not be realized. Vermont, it turned out, had been a welcome escape for Nelson from his troubles in New Hampshire, but the Green Mountain State was far from a perfect fit. It just was not a suitable environment for the type of high-volume tourist attraction which Steamtown needed to be, especially with the high maintenance and upkeep expenses demanded from a steam railroad operation. Vermont had strict advertising regulations which would not allow for signs or billboards. And though there were many friends in local and state government, these issues could not be resolved. Additionally, harsh winters led to accelerated deterioration of the collection and even the partial collapse of the engine shed in 1981, which damaged several locomotives. Edgar Meade and his successors set about accelerating the search for a new home, which had reignited in the 1970s. For a time, Florida, with the offer of 12-month operating seasons, once again seemed a welcoming choice. Meade also looked into Union Station in Washington, D.C. prior to the start of Amtrak in 1971.
What we used to do was take advantage of our 100-day season and create as much money as we could to survive the winter. There was absolutely no money from the state or from the town. The town begrudgingly gave us tax exemption because the town fathers knew that we did bring a lot of people to town to sleep in the motels and buy gasoline. Steamtown, we thought, was certainly a great benefit to Bellows Falls. At the same time, we thought that we really had to look elsewhere. Edgar T. Meade.
Edgar Meade served as director until his resignation in 1973. He was replaced by Robert Barbera Sr., whose father, former Lackawanna engineer Andy Barbera, worked as an engineer at Steamtown. Robert Barbera had a drastically different outlook on Steamtown, coming at it from a more analytical and economic perspective. Barbera's outlook, often criticized by rail fans, was drastically different to Nelson Blount's original intention, but did help the Steamtown Foundation survive economically throughout the 1970s. Soon after Barbera's appointment, Fred Bailey proposed a railfans weekend, yet Barbera was skeptical. Barbera was not keen on the idea and didn't think railfans would pay for an event. Thankfully, he gave the idea a chance, and Steamtown's railfan weekends became very successful, although at times expensive. Meanwhile, Barbera proposed the prospect of moving the museum to Kingston, New York, with operations on the former Ulster and Delaware line, but this proposition also died, in part to opposition in New York State. 1976 was a big year for the country, and proved just as monumental for Steamtown. To commemorate the United States Bicentennial, and also the Bicentennial of the Vermont Republic in 1977, the state of Vermont proposed a 2-year event with special steam-powered trains operating around the state. Originally, the plan had been for 3 trains operating simultaneously, but cost estimates soon made it clear that only 1 train would be feasible.
For several years, from 1967 on through the middle 80s, it was often a tough time for those on the board. Probably the easiest time was in the middle 70s, when Steamtown was a vital part of the bicentennial celebrations of 1976, and had a contract with the state of Vermont to run trains around the state. That was a boost, and it was probably the only period when cash flow, expenses, and income balanced to make a very livable year. Ted Blount.
Work soon began on firing up number 1293, which had last been used in 1964 and had sat for a 13-year hiatus. 9 former Long Island Railroad ping-pong passenger cars were selected for refurbishing and repainting. The official name for the expedition was to be the Vermont Bicentennial Steam Expedition. The train ran 6 days a week from the 1st of July up through Labor Day, operating on a schedule that would have been typical of a mainline passenger train in the 1940s and 1950s. Unfortunately, despite the mammoth effort and impressive result, the Vermont Bicentennial Steam Expedition was not financially successful. State promotion was not as extensive as it could have been, and negative publicity was directed towards Steamtown, who was perceived as price gouging the state on operating costs. However, the contract did allow for Steamtown to now have number 1293 operational, as well as 9 additional passenger coaches. In addition to the Bicentennial Steam Expedition, the Steamtown Foundation embarked upon a number of other interesting and noteworthy steam excursions throughout the 1970s. In October of 1973, Nickel Plate Berkshire number 759 pulled a fan trip to Concord, New Hampshire, and then up the northern Main line to White River Junction, before continuing on the central Vermont to Montpelier Junction. Throughout the decade, there were a number of other interesting steam excursions, including number 1278 being re-lettered and restyled to resemble a Delaware and Hudson locomotive, and number 1246 being altered to represent a Rutland steam locomotive. Despite his business savvy and lucrative ideas, which had done much to ensure Steamtown's survival, Robert Barbera had a stern manner and outlook which gained him much antipathy. Though his engineer father was respected, well-liked, and friendly, Robert was hostile against those he perceived as trying to freeload. Steamtown was certainly on shaky financial ground, and there were possible cases where others could have offered more support to the fledgling operation. However, the extremity of Barbera's approach often contrasted the open-armed approach to curiosity and wonder, which had been the main reason for the collection in the first place. Moreover, his negative outlook towards Robert Adams, Fred Richardson, and Nelson Blount was somewhat a matter of public record. Barbera's contract was not renewed by the board in 1980. Thereafter followed a brief interim period wherein longtime Steamtown employee Stuart Carter was in charge. Carter had run the gift shop with his wife Irene and had been around during the Blount days. He was able to acquire insurance to allow volunteer help, and his volunteer army would remain essential in helping to reinvigorate the grounds and maintain the collection.
A lot of good things that happened at Steamtown were done by volunteers. It probably continued to be so at least up through the late 80s. And for that, we owe a debt of appreciation. A lot of people were a part of that. Ted Blount.
Within a few months, Carter's interim leadership was replaced by Don Ball Jr., a well-known railroad author. His immediate task was attempting to find ways to keep Steamtown in Vermont. Unfortunately, that was an uphill battle. The Steamtown Foundation and its many dedicated volunteers had done their best in Vermont, but felt that the operation could not survive there. Support from the state and local municipalities had not improved, with directional signage still being denied under the state's guidelines. In many cases, tourists passing through the area continued on without even taking note of Riverside, down along the river.
I guess the disbelief of the Vermont board members was the kiss of death, as far as staying in Vermont. That was a very significant meeting, on that day in Vermont, that we had with the governor. It could have been saved. It could have stayed in Vermont. If he had just said, "I'll do what I can do. I'll try and help." He didn't. In fact, he was openly hostile. He said, "You guys have been a lot of problems," and was very negative. They were unwilling to make any moves that would assist us, such as signs that would help people get from the interstate to Steamtown, even if they only said Steam Museum. The 3 Vermont board members who were attorneys were just beside themselves over the state's attitude. How could you take an entity that had been there for several years that had done some good things, that was struggling, and just say, "We don't want you." In my mind, that was one of the elements in being able to say to Scranton, "Yes, we'll come." After that day with the governor, we moved as fast as we could to get things out of Vermont. It was a good move for us, actually, and we thank the governor these days for giving us the boot. Ted Blount.
Don Ball worked with Michael McManus, a syndicated columnist, advertising Steamtown's plight and desire for a new home. Those in Bellows Falls, reminded of the nationwide offers and hoopla surrounding the museum's search for a new home back in the 1960s, did not take the news very seriously. The final decision was not even certain until Scranton, Pennsylvania, signed a contract to house the museum. It was this commitment that finally sealed the deal. Preparations were made to move the Steamtown collection from Vermont to Pennsylvania. It was announced after the signing that there would be one final operating season in Vermont, 1983. Hoping to make a positive impression on Scranton, Ball and the board embarked on an advertising campaign for the final season in Vermont. When the season closed, Steamtown had hauled over 60,000 people. It was the best season since the early 1970s. With the Monadnock Steamtown in Northern now a distant memory, and the Green Mountain Railroad an independent company, Nelson Blount's legacy drew its final breath in Vermont on October 23, 1983. Steamtown USA's farewell to Vermont excursions of 22 cars departed Riverside for Rutland behind 3 Green Mountain diesels and Canadian Pacific 462 number 1246. Ultimately, 1,176 people were carried over 2 trips. It seems a cruel twist of irony that the final run of Nelson Blount's steam-powered legacy in New England was led by diesels, although this was necessary to keep their air intakes from being fouled by cinders from number 1246. A positive impression was certainly made. The last trains earned about $70,000 and cost about $10,000 to operate. Fred Bailey, who started his railroad career as a teenager picking weeds in North Walpole, after a chance meeting with his childhood hero, Nelson Blount, was incidentally among the last men to work for Nelson's creations in New England. When moving time came, the auctioning and sale of several pieces of Nelson's collection commenced. When the auction block closed, 40 locomotives and 60 cars were kept by the Foundation and moved by the Boston and Maine and the Delaware and Hudson to Scranton between late 1983 and 1985. Union Pacific Big Boy number 4012 left town by squeezing through the Bellows Falls Tunnel on the Conn River line with mere inches to spare. The tunnel floor had been lowered in the years since 1964, when the locomotive was forced to arrive by the Cheshire branch. All of these happenings indicated that chapters were closing at a record pace, not only in Steamtown's New England history, but the history of railroading in the region as a whole. The former Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western facilities at Scranton would prove to be a suitable home for Steamtown, and as many as 200,000 visitors were anticipated. But the excursion route out of Scranton was far from the bucolic New England scenery that had previously delighted visitors, and only 60,000 showed up in 1987. 3 years after the move from Vermont, Steamtown USA stared down bankruptcy and was deep in debt, exasperated by the high cost of renovating the facilities and maintaining the deteriorating collection. drastic measures would need to be taken to ensure the survival of the collection. And in 1986, the House of Representatives began to consider Steamtown, USA, as a candidate for protection under the National Park Service. By 1995, official acquisition by the National Park Service was a reality, and Steamtown National Historic Site was born. Today, Steamtown survives under federal protection as a museum experience dedicated to the railroading lifestyle, both in the local region and the nation as a whole. A beautiful roundhouse complex and machine shop, somewhat reminiscent of the original planned Keene complex, provide better mechanical space and tools than were ever available before. Digging around in the yard outside, one can find many signs pointing back to the early days in New England under Nelson Blount. Indeed, much of his original collection survives here. Coaches, cabooses, rolling stock, and steam locomotives of every shape and size. Specimens which Nelson once wrote personal checks for to ensure their survival. Unfortunately, some are a bit worse for wear. The unfortunate but very real result of years of outdoor storage begun back in New Hampshire and prioritizing under a federal budget. Yet they still exist, unlike so many other of these magnificent machines. Inside the engine house and shops, a dedicated team of workers and contractors maintain examples of America's steam railroading past. Much like Steamtown, USA, and even the Monadnock Steamtown in Northern, Steamtown National Historic Site is not without its criticisms and troubles. As a federal institution, guidelines and restrictions must be followed strictly, and restoration moves at the pace made possible under a federal budget with limited manpower. As has been the case throughout this story, there is far more to the situation than is usually considered by the average critic. Remember what Nelson had said when New Hampshire killed the state-sponsored Keene plan. It won't be as good a museum as it would here. I can't afford it. This was something that Nelson Blount clearly knew as far back as 1962, when he fought so hard to try and have Steamtown established by the state of New Hampshire. Fred Richardson, who had been involved with the Steamtown dream from its very first seed of thought, felt the same way. I'll tell you what, I think Nelson would have been very, very happy to see this go over to the Park Service. I know he would. It was getting too much of a drain for private funds, and somebody who could afford to do it and had the expertise and the backing to do it, like the Park Service, is beautiful. They have done a good job down there, don't you think? The reality of the situation is that each year thousands of families and rail fans of every age and interest are able to enjoy the results of over 60 years of preservation, started by a man who once wandered trackside as a child and dreamt of being an engineer. Just like him, they will go on to continue the legacy with their own contributions. No matter what happens to Steamtown as its long and complicated story continues into the unforeseen future, the memory of what railroading was will never fade away thanks to those who stoke a fiery passion for the subject.
My father would be thrilled. He was very burdened on making it all work in his last years. It was not easy on him. He had his own problems in trying to hold it all together and to pay for the railroad. He experienced, even before we got there, to have to make all the decisions. It was a real burden for him, and he was somewhat discouraged about the mild success that we were having. He would be discouraged to know we struggled with it for 17 years to hold it together. So he would be very, very pleased that it's gone the way it has. Ted Blount.
Nearly a lifetime has passed since those early days when a ragtag team of railroaders, enthusiasts, and dreamers, led by Nelson Blount, set out to preserve a dying era. The images in film captured during that time show almost unrecognizable days of long ago, when bright trains rambled through places like Sunapee and Keene, places that heard their last whistles decades ago and have traded those sun-baked rails for quiet paths through the forest. That time seems so long ago now, especially for those born decades after, who must pore through images and stories to find a shred of relatability to events they did not witness. But what carries through, no matter if you shook Nelson Blount's hand, rode on his trains, or hang on to the words of those who were there, are the themes of this story, hard work, nostalgia, gain and loss and gain again, happiness, tragedy. The people who make up this story elevated these iron machines to something greater, speaking to what can happen when you find a community who cares about something as much as you and can move to make it a reality. So much time has passed, and physical connections to those days have mostly faded, save for some if you know where to look. A few are more visible than others, like Alco RS1 number 405, still soldiering on in Vermont 60 years after Nelson purchased it for his new Green Mountain Railroad. Other reminders are hidden in the underbrush, reside in other parts of the country, or live on in private collections. Our world today is different in innumerable ways. But thanks to Nelson Blount and his many associates, chapters of history were written and played out. It's in the hills and valleys of New England, along its rivers and lakes, through its towns and cities, that their names echo even today. It's in these places that the Steamtown story will carry on being told forever.
We are no more, my baby. I'm a coming back to you. We are no more, my baby. Your lonely days are through. Whoa, 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 whoa. Oh, wait, those teardrops, 'cause I've been lonely too. Well, we no more, my baby. I'm a coming home to you. Dry those big brown eyes, my baby. I've been gone too long. Oh, this time I don't mean maybe. I know I've done you wrong. Yeah, we no more, my baby. Your lonely days are through. We no more, my baby. I'm a coming home to you. Come on and smile for me, my baby. Your tears are making me so sad. I can't stay away no longer. You're the only love I've ever had. Well, oh, no more, my baby. I'm coming home to you. We no more, my baby. Your lonely days are through, and I'm a coming home to you. Yeah, I'm a coming home to you. I said I was a coming home.